So with this, we can see that the Israelis are facing off in a very difficult situation where despite their military success, they have a very hard time actually winning this war. Hello and welcome back to another update. As we cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Israeli-Palestinian war, we see that the Israeli forces have significantly increased their attempts at breaking through the Hamas defenses all across the front line here in Gaza City area. We see that they're attacking to the southwest of the city, to the west of the city, and to the northwest of the city, with no attacks on the eastern side. We also see directional attacks in the direction of Jabalia camp and the Beit Lahia area from the northwestern sides of the Gaza Strip. We also see continuous attacks in the Beit Hanun area, both from the eastern side and the western side of the urban zone. With this, we see a significant increase of the Israeli attempts to break through the Hamas defenses. We also see that they are able to concentrate enough forces to launch these attacks. What we have seen is that their rate of advances has increased with the arrival by the Shifa hospital and the legal zone of the Gaza City. We see that they're at the Gaza City center, not the center of the city, but the city center. The difference is that most important locations are within the city center, or the center of the city is here in the eastern part, which is more of a residential zone rather than anything else. So this is more of a commercial zone. So with this, we see that the Israeli forces have surrounded the Shifa hospital from the west and the south, while the east and the north are contested, with the Hamas positions being mainly to the east of the hospital. The Israeli forces claim that the Hamas fighters have a major command center underneath the Shifa hospital, which is why they are currently fighting by it. So if the Israeli forces manage to take control over the Shifa hospital and are not able to prove that the Hamas fighters have a command center under the Shifa hospital, then they have a lot of explaining to do to the international community, as they would have fought over a hospital where the electricity is gone out, the medicine is run out, and so on, and a lot of casualties coming from the fighting right next to the hospital, while at the same time all of the resources are running out. And if it turns out that there's no military activity within the hospital, then they end up in a situation where they cannot explain themselves over all of the destruction and casualties that came from this fighting. This is all while there being a military activity within the Shifa hospital doesn't even legitimize them fighting by it. So they're taking a huge risk by fighting by it, even if their information is accurate. Talking about a Shifa hospital, we have this picture that is reportedly from the nearby areas of the hospital. We see this picture here, which has about 7 armored vehicles just stationed right here. They don't seem to be damaged, although it's difficult to see from the quality of the picture. However, they all look abandoned. This raises the question, why? After contemplating for quite a while, the only conclusion I could come up with is that there was a direct firefight between Israeli and Palestinian forces, where the Palestinian forces ambushed them, and them being caught off guard. And reportedly from previous incursions into both Gaza and Lebanon, the Israeli army reported that their tanks have poor performance in urban areas, especially when they work together in groups, because they have a very difficult time aiming at infantry that are very close by, especially when they're crowded like this. So likely what we saw is that the Palestinian forces launched an ambush against them, where the Israeli forces detected them too late, leading to a firefight, and after that the Israeli forces were forced to retreat. But so were the Palestinian forces, otherwise they would have destroyed these vehicles with whatever they had available. So likely this is somewhere in the gray zone, and the Israeli forces will likely retake these vehicles, or the Palestinian forces, if they gain control over this area, will destroy them, whoever gets to that place first. And at the same time, we see this other picture, which again shows a grouping of Israeli vehicles. This is a different one. We base that off the fact that one of these tanks do not have the cage on top of it to protect them against drones, while in the first picture, every single one of them have this cage. So this must be a different one, and we see an additional 5 vehicles here. So with this, we see that there's quite a few vehicles abandoned by the front line. This must be some kind of unknown strategy for the Israeli forces, or the Palestinian forces are simply just able to ambush the Israeli forces and force them away from their vehicles, but never be able to just destroy them, because none of these seem damaged. Zooming a bit out to the area where we see the coastline, we can see that the coastline is significantly less wide. This very narrow area is the area in which they want to connect the two sides. And we see in this video here that the Israeli forces are driving here by the coastline up to that point. And in these follow-up videos, we see the Israeli forces bombarding areas within this very narrow coastline, where we see that there are accurate preparations for their upcoming assaults to connect the two sides. So far they haven't been able to, but they are very likely very close to doing so. We base that off of the fact that recently they've been able to advance much more than they have been able to so far. We have seen them advance all throughout the front line, both in the northwest, northeast, and southwest. We see here in the northern parts that they managed to advance here south of the specialist hospital and west here by the coastline. We see that the Israeli forces are continuously expanding their zone of control. Although it is slow, they're able to advance through heavily urbanized areas. As such, they show that they're able to advance even in these areas. However, it seems that the Hamas strategy has been so far not to face off against the Israeli forces directly, but to resort to only purely ambushes. We have seen only so far that there have been fights with ambushes. We have not seen any other types of videos so far by either side. So with this, we see that the Hamas fighters are likely most of the time in the tunnels. And there's also a likelihood that they do not even have that high of a concentration within Gaza itself. They likely have a lot of ammunition, and then they send additional soldiers whenever they lose someone. So they have a specific amount of soldiers in the northern parts, and the rest seem to be in the central and southern parts of the Gaza Strip, which is much wider. With that, they are able to move in between the two sides with using their tunnels. As such, the Israeli forces have an important task here where they have cut the central part of Gaza, that they need to search for all the tunnels, which they've been doing, to try and get rid of all of them in between the two sides, to try and cut the communication and the supply lines underneath the ground between the two sides. However, due to the depth of 70 meters of these tunnels, it may be very difficult to detect them if there's no entrances going up and down in this area. And as such, the Palestinian forces will unlikely lose their tunnels from and to Gaza City. This raises the question, will the Israeli forces even be able to destroy Hamas, which is their official war goal? If the Israeli forces want to win the war, they need to completely destroy Hamas. To do so, they essentially need to get rid of all of Gaza, because unless they take all of the Gaza Strip, they cannot guarantee that they have taken down Hamas. If they only take northern parts, then they may have gotten rid of half of Hamas, but not all of it. And as such, it would be a defeat in the eyes of the Israeli government and in the eyes of the Israeli people. When they have announced their goal to be the destruction of all of Hamas, that is what they need to accomplish for a win. So the question arises, will the Israeli forces be able to win? Because in the scenario that they completely take control over the northern parts, Gaza City and the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, if they want to completely get rid of the Hamas, they need to go into the southern parts. But in that case, where do the Palestinian civilians go? Currently, they are all concentrated in the southern parts, with few being left in the northern parts, mostly in the hospitals. As such, there's about 2 million Palestinian civilians in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. They can't go to the northern parts because it's completely destroyed. Over 200,000 homes have been partially or completely destroyed since the start of the war. As such, if the Palestinian forces go to the northern parts, they will have nowhere to go. So there's two options. Either the Palestinians are pushed into Egypt, which the Egyptians have refuted, are not willing to take in 2 million Palestinians, because they believe that if the Palestinians enter Egypt, they will never be able to return to Gaza. The second option is for them to go to Israel. But that is not an option either, because of what happened on October 7th. It would be a huge failure for the Israeli government if the Palestinians are then pushed into Israel, even temporarily. Therefore, we see that there's no solution for the Israeli army. They don't have a plan, or they have not announced any plan that allows them to destroy Hamas. Therefore, currently, it is very hard to actually find a scenario where the Israeli forces can quote-unquote win without Egypt taking 2 million Palestinian refugees. That is the only option Israel has to actually quote-unquote win this conflict. And that is not even the end of it, because we have had multiple reports that the Israeli forces are further building up their presence in the north, of which we actually see this video here, which shows Israeli buildup in the north with multiple vehicles and tanks moving to the northern part of the border with Lebanon. As such, we see continuously that the Israeli army is building up in the north, and there's increasing clashes between the Israeli army and the Hezbollah army, and as such, there's an increasing risk of all-out war between the two sides. And we even have an Iranian official say that the Hezbollah has officially entered the war with the amount of fighting going on between Israel and Lebanon. As such, what will the Israeli war goal be in the north? And will they be able to fight a war on two fronts? Will the US Army participate in the fighting as they have promised if anyone else gets intertwined with the fighting? So many questions and a lot of risk of escalation, while there's hardly any straight path for victory for Israel. So the current situation doesn't look well for the Israeli government, as we see that throughout the world, especially in Western countries, surprisingly, there's a lot of massive protests like this one in London, where the estimates say approximately 300,000 people gathered in London to demonstrate against the Israeli government and the way that they're handling the situation in Gaza, with over 11,000 fatalities within the civilian population in Gaza. As such, there's an increasing dissatisfaction with how Israel is handling the situation and with the Western government's support of Israel, because so far they have shown nothing but support for quote-unquote Israel's right to defend itself against the Palestinians. But in the end, we see that the Palestinian casualties, civilian casualties, is now 11 times higher than the Israeli civilian casualties since the start of the war. As such, the civilian population in these Western countries, as well as the rest of the world, where, for example, in Indonesia, there was estimated to be up to 2 million protesters. As such, there's an increasing dissatisfaction, there's boycotting, and so much more against the Israelis, and the hate is growing day by day, with the former Prime Minister of Israel saying that Israel risks receiving the hate of a whole generation in the whole world, with the youngest people supporting Palestine and the older people supporting Israel. Specifically in the United States, where official polls set the number at about 30% of Democrats between the age of 35 and 18 support Israel, with the highest number being somewhere around 80 to 90% of 65-plus-year-olds of Republicans supporting Israel. So that's a 3-to-1 difference, where the opposite side either doesn't know or supports Palestine. So Democrats and young ones specifically seem to support Palestine over Israel, with older Republicans supporting Israel over Palestine. And with the current president of the United States, Joe Biden, being a Democrat, he's going against his voter base to support Israel. And this can hurt him in the upcoming election, which is now less than a year away. With this, we can see that the longer the war goes on for, the more difficult it becomes for Israel and its Western allies to keep supporting this war and avoiding a ceasefire. So with this, we can see that the Israelis are facing off in a very difficult situation, where despite their military success, they have a very hard time actually winning this war. As one of the Israeli supporters said, Israel is never allowed to actually win a war. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.